Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another debate etiquette video with me, Titan Ted. Now the third and final, probably, video of this mini-series that I'm aiming to do is on a topic I've heard quite a few social commentating and political YouTubers talk about in the past, as well as a bunch of other people on those same subjects in other social media circles on other social media websites. And this is the idea of the horseshoe ideology theory, or horseshoe ideology. It's got a few sort of definitions, but they all pertain to the same thing. What this basically means is what happens when you argue your point to such an extreme extent, or you're so vehemently against the opposing side in the argument that you're fighting against, that you end up shoehorning around and end up becoming essentially just as poisonous to the conversation as they are, which includes your side of the argument, or you and your contemporaries in your particular subsector of that particular debate using the same tactics and similar kinds of movements and argumentative sort of structures as the people you're arguing against. Now, in particular, I've heard people such as Skeptic talk about this, and it is a bane on proper, concise, mature, and constructive debates and arguments, because if you have one side of an argument shoehorning around and essentially becoming a mirror universe version of the people they're arguing against, and essentially just using the same tactics and practical arguing structures and utensils to get their points across, then essentially you've just got two different extremes who are just separated by their beliefs and ideologies, just constantly scrapping with each other. This is part of the reason why, despite how I've changed my own personal politics over the years, I've always sought to sort of stay away from extremism, because to me it is one of the banes of properly constructing a better society and a better discussion with which to help build a better society and just generally have better conversations. I mean, if you find someone who has such an extreme view that they will not be willing to budge from their own personal viewpoint, then you're not really going to be able to have the most fully constructive viewpoint with them that you possibly could. You may find out why they believe their points and why they believe what they believe in the particular way that they do, and who knows, that may actually end up being quite interesting, quite helpful to what you are looking for. But ultimately, it won't really help the cause of a constructive debate that will help everyone, at least to a certain degree, be it small or major. So I guess my main point here is to steer well away from extremism, but also to sort of recognise what the tactics we are using in debates and political protests and sociological argument making and theory formulating, and making sure that the arguments we're making are not exactly the same as those we're arguing against. Because as ridiculous as this sounds, it is plausible that it can happen, and to quite a considerable and depressing extent. For example, I think back to, say, the build-up to the 2016 presidential election, where the left and the people who were supporting Hillary Clinton were accused of fear-mongering and faking hate crimes against supporter groups that were predominantly supportive of Hillary Clinton, and using this as sort of a fake brownie points system of garnering sympathy for the voters of Hillary Clinton and garnering support for her presidential cause. As it was, many of these cases ended up being fake as all hell, really. But what really soured this debate and soured the strivings for better accountability in the actions of, support makers and people who were particularly prominent in support of one particular candidate, was the fact that a lot of conservatives ended up doing it as well. I remember people posting pictures up on the internet of someone with like a bruise, be it an old woman or a young kid or a young lady who just come out of college or something, and they would post it on like Facebook and Twitter and stuff with like a caption of how this person had been beaten up by such and such group of people who were supporters of either Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. This is what the liberals and leftists want. And in many cases, these pictures were found out to be related to completely different tales and articles just on the basis of a simple Google reverse search. And, it sort of basically came to light that these were the same tactics that were being used by some of the more extreme advocates for Hillary Clinton and the more left-leaning candidates for presidency in 2016. And it kind of soured the race for presidential debate and election for both Clinton and Trump, as well as a number of other both conservative and liberal and socialist candidates. I mean, it just made the whole situation just even more worse than it was already going to be. And as we saw, it was always going to be quite sour and bitter, and this only made it worse, really. So it's not just that, performing the same actions as the extremists on the opposite side of the argument who you're arguing against will not just disadvantage the general argument, but it may also end up disadvantaging your own side of the argument as well, unfortunately. But I don't know, this has kind of probably been one of the more shorter points I was thinking of during this mini-series, and again, like I said, I apologise for somewhat haphazard audio and sound quality and video quality as well, and the fact that I mess up my words sometimes. Unfortunately, I'm working with a very basic camera and microphone system that's built into my laptop where I'm not necessarily able to edit it at the moment. I'm going to try and get to the point where I can, but unfortunately I don't really have the funds or capabilities at the moment to do that, as in terms of like software and stuff like that. So apologies for the hodgepodge, shall we say, quality of this video. But in any case, I hope you guys have at least found this video entertaining, or at the very least helpful and informative, because while it is a short point to make, I do think the idea of shoehorning theory and how this affects both sides of political debates is a very important issue, because the more you become like your opposing side of the argument that you're arguing against is when you start to use the tactics that they use and say that, well, it's alright when I do it, or simply just disregarding the cons of when you do it yourself. And I believe, while it is a short point to make, it is a very important one that needs to be made anyway, because in order to prove your point as being better in a political debate, you not just need to back it up with good evidence and recognise the reasons why your opponent is arguing what they are arguing, but you also need to separate yourself from the rest of the pack and make sure that you rise above the more stringent extremist and less considerate people who are debating against you. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everyone you're debating against isn't considerate, but at the same time, if there is extremists on the opposite side of the debate who you're arguing against, and especially if they're the people in particular that you're arguing against, then it would be very advisable to not use the same tactics as them and lower yourself to their levels, because let's face it, extremists aren't usually known for being open-minded or perhaps particularly the most logical, and that goes for extremists on any side of either debate in any circumstance, and I hold that dear to heart. I mean, I know there is an exception to every rule, but I still claim that to be truthful. In any case, hope you enjoyed this video, or again, at least found it informative. If you do want to show any support to this video and this channel, leave a like, comment, share and subscribe. If you want to show any extra support to me, be sure to check out my other YouTube channels as well as my social media platforms in the video description below. And until next time, I've been Titan Ted. and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, and bye bye for now.